Late one night, a racist cop sees a black kid driving with a white baby and assumes the worst. Officer Thomas's shocking radio call. Possible 1031, juvenile suspect with a child, stuns dispatch and sparks outrage, but the truth about 12-year-old Marcus's heroic act unravels his prejudice, saving a life and exposing a broken system. Under the pale light of street lamps, Marcus, a 12-year-old black boy, gripped the steering wheel of an old car with shaky hands. The weight of the white baby in his arms pressed against his chest, her cries echoing through the empty streets, growing louder with every passing moment. He was driving faster than he should, but there was no time to waste. The baby's small body was limp, her fragile cries mixing with the urgency of the situation. Marcus wasn't the baby's father, but in this moment, he was the only one who could help. His neighbor, the baby's mother, had collapsed unexpectedly, and, with no one else around, Marcus found himself thrust into a role he wasn't prepared for. His mind raced as he tried to focus on the road. The baby's condition was worsening, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time. He didn't know what he was doing, didn't know how to help, but he knew one thing. He had to get to the hospital fast. Marcus was just a boy. He shouldn't be behind the wheel, and he shouldn't have to bear the weight of someone else's life on his young shoulders. Every second felt like a lifetime, the car's engine humming as he pressed the pedal harder, trying to outrun the panic creeping into his chest. His mind flickered to his own family, to the struggles they'd faced, and to the responsibility suddenly thrust upon him. The baby's cries grew louder, more desperate, and Marcus knew he couldn't stop, not now. Just as the faint glow of the hospital sign appeared in the distance, Marcus noticed flashing lights in his rearview mirror. His stomach sank. A siren wailed. His heart raced faster than the car could go. He had no choice but to pull over. He was terrified of everything, but most of all, of what would happen next. He was a 12-year-old black boy, alone with a white baby, and a cop was pulling him over in the middle of the night. The odds were against him. Officer Thomas, in his mid-40s, stepped out of his patrol car, his silhouette framed by the flashing lights. His steps were measured, deliberate. He scanned the car with suspicion, his eyes narrowing as he looked through the window at Marcus. He took in the sight of the black child gripping the wheel, the white baby in his arms, and didn't immediately register the emergency. All he saw was a young black boy behind the wheel, and an assumption was already forming in his mind. Marcus's breath caught in his throat, his grip on the baby tightening as he lowered the window. The officer approached, his voice sharp and demanding. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his tone harsh, like Marcus had already done something wrong. Marcus's voice shook, but he tried to stay calm. "I'm trying to get this baby to the hospital. Please, my neighbor's sick. She needs help." The officer's gaze shifted from Marcus to the baby and back again. He didn't see a worried child rushing to save a life. He saw a threat, a black boy in the wrong place at the wrong time. "You're driving a car with no license," Officer Thomas said, his voice filled with skepticism. "Where's your mother? What are you doing with that child?" Marcus stammered, trying to explain, but the words got tangled in his throat. The baby's cries were louder now, almost frantic, and Marcus knew he didn't have much time. "Please, sir, I just need to get her help," he repeated, his voice more desperate, but the officer wasn't listening. His eyes narrowed, his hand hovering near his gun as he assessed the situation. "You're just a kid," he said, a sneer creeping into his voice. "How did you get this car? You're not supposed to be driving. And where is her mother? This doesn't make sense." Marcus's heart pounded, the weight of the officer's judgment suffocating. All he wanted was to get away from this confrontation so he could save the baby. But the officer wasn't done. "Step out of the car," he commanded, his voice cold and demanding. Fear seized Marcus, but he didn't move, his arms still wrapped tightly around the baby, not allowing him to get out of the car. He was shaking now, not just from the cold, but from the overwhelming weight of it all. "Please," he whispered, more to himself than the officer, "I just need to get her to the hospital." The officer stood there, eyes locked onto Marcus with suspicion and prejudice that had clouded his judgment from the moment he saw the black boy with a white baby. But as the baby's cries reached a fever pitch, something flickered in the officer's eyes. Maybe doubt, maybe confusion, but for a brief moment there was a crack in his armor. Marcus didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if the officer would see the truth or if he would continue to let his prejudices control the situation. All he knew was that the life of the baby was at stake. The officer's stance softened for a split second, and then, just as quickly, he straightened up again. The tension in the air thickened. Marcus had done everything right in his eyes. He was just trying to help. But the officer hadn't seen that. He hadn't seen a child acting out of pure necessity. Instead, he saw a young black boy who didn't belong in this situation, a child caught in the intersection of racism and a desperate need for help. This moment, brief but electric, would decide whether Marcus could get the help he needed for the baby, or if he'd be punished for something he didn't do. Officer Thomas sat in his patrol car earlier that night, the soft hum of the engine barely breaking the eerie silence of the empty streets. It was late, almost midnight, and he was on routine patrol. The quiet was broken only by the occasional creak of a distant tree or the low growl of an engine somewhere far off. A man in his 40s, having served in law enforcement for over 2 decades, Officer Thomas was known for his quick judgments and no-nonsense attitude. He had a reputation for being tough on crime. But what most people didn't know, what wasn't discussed in the reports, was his deep-seated racial bias. Years of ingrained prejudices shaped how he saw the world, especially when it came to black individuals. He had seen it all, or so he thought. Late-night traffic stops, suspicious movements, at-risk areas. In his mind, he understood the way the world worked. Tonight, as he cruised through the streets, something caught his attention that didn't sit right with him. A young black boy driving a car, his hands gripping the wheel tightly, with a white baby in his arms. It was a sight that immediately raised red flags. Officer Thomas wasn't one to hesitate. His instincts told him this was a crime, perhaps a kidnapping or worse, a carjacking gone wrong. There was no way a 12-year-old should be driving at that hour, especially with a white baby. His heart rate quickened as his eyes narrowed, scanning the scene. The boy's presence in that car seemed out of place, too young, too vulnerable, and in Officer Thomas's mind, too suspicious. Without a second thought, he flicked on his siren and pulled in behind the car. His hand rested on the radio as he spoke into the mic, his voice sharp. "Got a possible 1031. Suspect appears to be a juvenile with a child. Requesting backup." The call shocked dispatch. The words juvenile suspect and child, sparking immediate concern across the radio waves. Marcus, completely unaware of the officer's prejudices, had only one thing on his mind: getting the baby to safety. He wasn't a criminal, nor was he doing anything illegal. He was a 12-year-old boy who had stepped up to help his neighbor. His mother, A hard-working woman who kept their modest home running had raised him to always help those in need. Marcus knew how to do what was right, no matter how difficult or scary the situation was. Tonight, he had done just that. His neighbor's white baby had been left in his care after her parents couldn't find anyone else to look after her while they rushed out to handle an emergency. The baby had fallen ill, and with no one else around, Marcus, despite his fear, had taken charge. The hospital wasn't far, but in the dead of night, with the baby crying in his arms, Marcus was desperate to get there quickly. He knew he wasn't old enough to drive, but in that moment, he didn't care. He had to save her. His heart was pounding, and every passing second felt heavier, the cries of the baby in his arms echoing in his mind. He couldn't afford to waste time. He was so focused on the road ahead that he didn't notice the flashing lights in his rearview mirror until they were too close to ignore. Panic set in as the siren screamed into the night and Marcus's hands tightened around the wheel. Was it another car? What had he done wrong? He wasn't speeding, wasn't breaking any laws. He was just trying to get to the hospital. The officer's commanding voice broke the silence as he approached the car. "Pull over," Officer Thomas ordered. Marcus's heart skipped a beat and he nervously veered to the side of the road, his breath coming in quick bursts. His palms were clammy, and the baby's cries seemed to grow louder with every passing second. "Stay calm," Marcus whispered to himself, though his voice trembled. He tried to remember everything his mother had taught him about respecting authority, but his mind was clouded with worry. He knew the stakes were high. One wrong move could end in disaster. As the officer approached the car, Marcus could feel his anxiety tightening in his chest. The officer's uniform, his posture, the way he walked, all of it was intimidating. The last thing Marcus wanted was trouble, but the officer's eyes scanned the situation quickly, seeing only what he wanted to see. A young black boy behind the wheel at night with a white baby in his arms. The officer's gaze hardened, and his suspicion grew. In his mind, Marcus was just another statistic, another black youth involved in something shady. Even though Marcus had only been trying to help, the officer didn't take the time to assess the full situation, to understand that the white baby in Marcus's arms wasn't his sibling or a child he'd taken without permission. Officer Thomas immediately jumped to conclusions, his deep-rooted biases clouding his judgment. Marcus, trapped by the officer's assumptions, would have to find a way to prove his innocence or risk becoming another victim of a broken system. But Marcus wasn't about to let the officer's prejudice define him. He had no idea what Officer Thomas was thinking, but he did know one thing. He had to get to the hospital, and the baby needed help. This wasn't just a bad situation, it was a crisis. With every second wasted, the chance of getting to the hospital grew slimmer. As Officer Thomas moved closer, Marcus realized he was facing something much bigger than a traffic stop. His courage would be tested, and the officer's judgment would determine whether or not an innocent child could continue on his path to do what was right. The car rolled to a stop, the engine sputtering slightly as Marcus pulled over to the side of the road. The sharp sound of the siren echoed in his ears, mixing with the frantic cries of the baby in his arms. His heart raced as he gripped the wheel tightly, trying to calm his breathing, trying to push away the rising panic. He couldn't afford to panic. Not now. Through the rearview mirror, Marcus saw the police officer's silhouette approach, the bright flash of the patrol car's lights casting an eerie glow over the snow-covered streets. Everything about the scene felt wrong. Marcus was just a 12-year-old boy caught in the middle of a crisis, And now, it seemed he was about to be dragged into something far bigger than he ever expected. The officer's footsteps crunched against the snow as he reached the car. Marcus couldn't help but glance at him. His uniform, the badge, the stern face, all adding to the pressure. When the officer reached the window, he leaned in, his gaze sharp and intense. "What's a kid like you doing out here with a white baby?" Officer Thomas demanded, his voice low and forceful. Marcus swallowed hard, doing his best to steady his nerves. The baby's cries were growing louder, and every second felt like an eternity. He tried to keep his voice calm, tried to explain the situation, but his words didn't seem to matter. "I'm just taking her to the hospital," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear tightening his chest. "Her parents couldn't find anyone else. They needed to go, and I'm helping." The officer didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped back, his eyes scanning the car, taking in the scene. Marcus behind the wheel, a 12-year-old black boy in an oversized jacket, clutching the white baby who was still wailing. It didn't add up in Officer Thomas's mind. He couldn't fathom why a black kid would be driving at this hour, let alone carrying a white baby. Something didn't sit right with him. The officer's gaze shifted to Marcus, suspicion deepening with every passing second. He leaned forward, his voice now colder, more accusatory. "You expect me to believe that? A kid like you, driving a car in the middle of the night with a white baby? Where are her parents? Why aren't they here?" Marcus's throat tightened, his stomach churned with the weight of the officer's words. He was just trying to help, but the officer wasn't listening. All that mattered was that Marcus didn't fit the officer's idea of what he should be doing. In his mind, a black boy at this hour, in a car with a white child, was a threat. Marcus's chest felt tight, the weight of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just a simple traffic stop anymore. This was an accusation, an interrogation. Marcus couldn't understand why the officer wasn't hearing him. He was just trying to do the right thing, yet all Officer Thomas could see was a threat. A child who didn't belong behind the wheel. A black kid who couldn't possibly have a legitimate reason for being out at this hour. Marcus's mind raced, his thoughts running in different directions. What if the officer didn't believe him? What if he arrested him? What would happen to the baby then? He couldn't stop thinking about the child in his arms, her soft cries a constant reminder of the urgency of the situation. The hospital was so close, but the officer's questions and doubts were keeping him from moving forward. "Please," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. "She needs help. We need to get to the hospital." Officer Thomas paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he took in Marcus's pleading expression, but he didn't soften. Instead, he shifted his stance, crossing his arms over his chest. "I'm not buying your story, kid. I think you're hiding something. Maybe I should call for backup." Every word from the officer felt like a punch to Marcus's gut. He didn't know how to explain himself any better. He didn't know what else to say. He was just a child. He had no experience dealing with situations like this. He had only ever been taught to trust the police, to be respectful, but now, in this moment, respect felt like it wouldn't be enough. The baby continued to cry in his arms, her tiny face scrunching up in discomfort. And it was all Marcus could do to hold back his own tears. He needed to get the baby to the hospital. He needed to make the officer see that he wasn't the enemy, that he wasn't a criminal, that he was just a kid trying to do the right thing. "Please," Marcus repeated, his voice desperate now. "She's sick. I have to get her help. I'm not doing anything wrong." The officer's eyes softened for just a fraction of a second, but the suspicion still lingered. It was clear that he hadn't decided what to do yet. But in that moment, Marcus was more than just scared. He was determined. He had come this far, and he wasn't going to let his race or the officer's assumptions stop him from doing what needed to be done. "What's your name, kid?" Officer Thomas asked, his tone shifting slightly. "Marcus," the boy answered quickly. "Marcus Williams." The officer held his gaze for a moment longer before he straightened up, his mind still reeling with questions. But Marcus wasn't about to wait for more interrogation. He gently rocked the baby in his arms, trying to soothe her, and, with one last look at the officer, he made up his mind. He wasn't going to let fear control him. "Please, just let me go," Marcus said, his voice firm. "She needs help." As Officer Thomas stood there, still gripping the side of Marcus's car, his eyes wandered over the interior one last time. His gaze lingered over the baby bag on the passenger seat. It was then that his eyes landed on something, a small birth certificate tucked neatly inside the bag. The officer hesitated for a moment before reaching in and pulling it out, unfolding it with a sense of urgency that hadn't been there before. Marcus watched the officer closely, his stomach tight with unease, as the officer read over the document. The baby's name, date of birth, and the names of her parents were all clearly listed. But it was the family name that caught Officer Thomas's attention. It was a name that carried weight in the town, the kind of name that opened doors, that commanded respect, and that could change the course of an entire career. The officer's eyes widened as he connected the dots. The white baby in Marcus's arms was the daughter of one of the most influential families in town. A wave of realization hit Officer Thomas like a cold slap. His face, once stern and accusatory, drained of color as the full gravity of his mistake settled in. The officer's posture stiffened, and his earlier aggression shifted into visible discomfort. His eyes flicked from the birth certificate to Marcus, the child he had wrongly assumed was a criminal. The officer stammered for a moment, his words stumbling out. I didn't know," Officer Thomas began, but his voice trailed off, unable to fully process the weight of his error. Marcus, meanwhile, remained calm, unwavering in his stance. His eyes met the officer's, but there was no anger or frustration in his gaze, just a quiet, steady resolve. "You were wrong," Marcus said simply, his voice cool but firm. "I didn't need your judgment. I was just trying to help." The officer swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable under the weight of his own actions. He had wrongly judged this young black boy based on nothing more than assumptions and prejudice, and now the truth was in front of him. He glanced down at the birth certificate again, as if hoping it might somehow explain away his behavior, but it couldn't. The damage had already been done. "I'm sorry," Officer Thomas stammered, his face flushing with embarrassment. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean to make you feel like—" But Marcus wasn't interested in the apology. He wasn't looking for an admission of guilt or regret. Instead, he looked at the officer with quiet dignity and said, "You don't need to apologize. You need to understand that I don't have to prove anything to you. You just have to respect me and know that I was right all along." The words hung in the cold night air, the truth resonating in the silence between them. Marcus had been the one to act selflessly, the one to step up when no one else would, while Officer Thomas had let his biases dictate his actions. The officer's face reddened even more, clearly embarrassed as the reality of his own prejudice hit him full force. He had acted out of ignorance, assuming the worst without taking a moment to truly understand the situation. And now, standing before the very child he had wrongly accused, he was forced to confront the consequences of his assumptions. "Go ahead," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Take the birth certificate. Do what you need to do. But remember, I didn't do anything wrong, and you shouldn't judge people based on what you think you know." The officer looked at Marcus, his discomfort palpable. He had no more words to offer. The damage wasn't something that could be undone with a simple apology. Marcus had not only proven that he was right, but he had forced Officer Thomas to reckon with his own prejudices. And in that moment, Marcus had gained something far more valuable than an apology. He had gained respect, and he had exposed the harsh reality of racial assumptions. As Officer Thomas stepped back, still processing the truth, Marcus gently rocked the white baby in his arms, his focus returning to the task at hand. He wasn't going to let the officer's mistake stop him. The baby needed to get to the hospital, and that was all that mattered now. With a final glance at the officer, Marcus started the car again, the engine humming to life. Officer Thomas stood there, watching him go, a man shaken by his own error, a man who, for once, had learned a lesson he would not soon forget. The car pulled away. The baby's cries now softened as Marcus continued his journey. The weight of the moment lingered, but for Marcus, there was no looking back. He had done the right thing, and that was all that mattered. As Marcus drove away, his grip on the wheel remained steady, his mind fixed on the most important task at hand, getting the baby to the hospital. The encounter with Officer Thomas had been jarring, but he refused to let it shake him. He had no time for anger, no energy to waste on resentment. The baby's well-being was all that mattered. The cries from the infant had softened slightly, but Marcus knew there wasn't a second to spare. Meanwhile, Officer Thomas stood frozen in place, watching the taillights disappear down the dimly lit road. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the realization of what had just transpired. For years, he had relied on his instincts, his authority unquestioned, his biases unchecked. Tonight, however, his gut reaction had led him down a path of humiliation. The truth had unraveled in front of him, and there had been no way to spin it. He had been wrong, completely, undeniably wrong. Back at the precinct, word of the incident spread quickly. Dashcam footage, paired with reports from dispatch and onlookers, painted a damning picture of Officer Thomas's conduct. His reputation, once unchallenged among his peers, was now under scrutiny. Complaints from the past, ones that had once been ignored, resurfaced. Patterns of racial profiling, cases dismissed under technicalities, and encounters brushed under the rug suddenly demanded attention. By the following morning, the department had launched a formal investigation into his history of policing. The chief, upon reviewing the evidence, had little choice but to suspend Thomas pending further review. The weight of his actions, long dismissed as routine policing, had finally caught up with him. The officer, who once thrived on unchecked authority, now found himself cornered by the very system he had so often exploited. Meanwhile, Marcus arrived at the hospital. The ER doors slid open with a whoosh, the warm air inside offering a stark contrast to the biting cold of the night. Nurses and doctors rushed toward him as he carried the white baby inside, his face calm despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "She needs help," he said, breathless, his arms tightening around the small bundle in his hands. A nurse quickly took the baby from him, her expression softening as she realized just how young Marcus was. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. We'll take care of her now." Marcus exhaled, nodding. He had done his part. He had done what was right, no matter the obstacles that had tried to stand in his way. News of Marcus's act of courage spread quickly. By the next day, the local media picked up the story. 12-year-old black boy saves white baby after harrowing journey to hospital. Reporters wanted to know more about him, about his bravery, about his unshaken determination in the face of injustice. The community, inspired by Marcus's actions, rallied behind him. People who had once remained silent about their own experiences with racial profiling now spoke out. The incident became a catalyst for conversations about police reform, about the dangers of unchecked bias, and about the quiet power of truth. Officer Thomas, once a respected figure in the precinct, became a symbol of everything that needed to change. His name, no longer associated with authority, was now synonymous with prejudice and wrongful assumptions. His career, though not officially over, had been irreversibly damaged. He had spent years thinking he understood the world, but in one night, a 12-year-old had shattered everything he thought he knew. Marcus, however, had no interest in fame or recognition. When asked how he felt about the officer facing consequences, he simply shrugged and said, "It's not about him. It was never about him. I just wanted to do the right thing." And that was the lesson that remained. In a world where prejudice could cloud judgment and strip people of their dignity, Marcus had proven that integrity and truth would always shine through. As Officer Thomas sat in the police precinct, staring at the blank walls of an internal affairs office, the world outside moved forward, but for him, everything had come to a screeching halt. He had been placed on immediate administrative leave while an investigation into his history of racial profiling was underway. The dashcam footage from his cruiser, combined with Marcus's calm yet firm recounting of the events, painted a clear picture. Officer Thomas had not only wrongfully detained a black child acting in a life-saving emergency, but he had also let his biases dictate his response. The media wasted no time in reporting on the case, and within hours, outrage flooded the community. Citizens demanded accountability, activists called for justice, and even members within the police force could no longer turn a blind eye. By the next morning, the police chief held a press conference, with cameras flashing and microphones capturing every word. The chief announced that Officer Thomas had been officially suspended without pay. His record was being reviewed, and his past encounters, many of which had been previously dismissed, were now being re-examined. Several complaints from black and brown citizens, once ignored, were resurfacing, forcing the department to confront the systemic biases within its ranks. As public pressure mounted, the city's mayor weighed in. "Racial profiling has no place in our police force," she stated firmly. "Officer Thomas's actions are a reflection of a deeper issue we must address. We will not allow injustice to go unpunished." The final blow came a week later. Officer Thomas, once respected among his peers, was officially terminated from the force. The department cited repeated misconduct, bias-driven policing, and abuse of power as reasons for his dismissal. His reputation, once upheld by the shield he wore, was now in ruins. While some officers expressed quiet solidarity with him, the truth was undeniable. He had failed to uphold the values of justice and fairness, and now, for the first time, he was experiencing the consequences of the system he had so often used against others. As Marcus sat with his mother, watching the news coverage of Thomas's firing, He felt no sense of triumph, only quiet relief. He hadn't needed an apology. He hadn't needed acknowledgement. What mattered was that justice had been served, and for the first time in a long time, the city saw a glimpse of what accountability truly looked like. Marcus's story wasn't just about a black boy doing the right thing. It was about how deeply ingrained biases can turn a moment of urgency into a moment of injustice. But even in the face of prejudice, truth prevailed. Marcus didn't need validation from the officer who doubted him. He didn't need recognition or apologies. All he cared about was ensuring the white baby's safety, and in doing so, he unknowingly exposed the cracks in a system that had failed too many before him. His quiet defiance and unwavering sense of duty forced people to question their own judgments. How many times had they assumed the worst without knowing the truth? How often had someone been unfairly targeted just because of who they were? For Officer Thomas, the consequences were unavoidable. His badge, once a symbol of authority, had become a reminder of his failure. But this was bigger than just one officer losing his job. It was about acknowledging the harm caused by racial profiling and systemic injustice. It was about recognizing that a child's life had been put at risk simply because of an officer's refusal to see past his own prejudices. The community response was overwhelming. Activists used Marcus's story to push for reform, calling for better training, accountability, and a shift in the way officers interacted with people of color. Parents used his experience as a lesson for their children, an example of why standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity, is always worth it. For Marcus himself, the experience left him with a sense of clarity. He had done what needed to be done, not for praise, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. In the weeks that followed, Marcus continued his life as any 12-year-old would. He went to school, spent time with his friends, and helped his mother when she needed him. But there was something different now, an unspoken respect from those who once overlooked him. His actions had proven that courage isn't about size, age, or power. It's about standing firm when it matters most. Marcus didn't just save a white baby. He changed the course of an officer's life and challenged a broken system. He proved that in the face of bias, integrity is the strongest weapon of all. A racist cop saw a black kid driving with a white baby and let prejudice cloud his judgment. But what Officer Thomas said into his radio, possible 1031 juvenile suspect, shocked the community and exposed his bias. Marcus's courage not only saved a life, but unraveled a system's flaws, forcing accountability and sparking a movement for justice that would echo far beyond that night.